Howdy ho, my peeps. I have been wanting to talk to you guys about this for a long time. This book that I'm going to share with you. I didn't feel a real urgency until now because what these authors wrote of 20 years ago is coming into play right now. And the name of the book, which was written in 1997, is The Fourth Turning. It was written by William Strauss and Neil Howe. William Strauss has passed away, but Neil Howe is still alive and working as a consultant to businesses and to the government about what to expect in our near future. He is he's an historian and an economist, and he works for a company called Concord Coalition, who I haven't really looked up yet. But he has been talking and vocal about what's happening, what was going to happen in the election. He actually made the wrong prediction, which I think is interesting. He was, up until the very end, absolutely convinced that there was no way Hillary couldn't win. But as things got closer and closer to the end, he changed his mind. So that's been interesting to follow. But the point is, well, let me just read the description of this book to you to kind of set up why I think it's so important. First came the post-war high, then the awakening of the 60s and 70s, and now the unraveling. That was 20 years ago, the unraveling. This audacious and provocative book tells us what to expect just beyond the start of the next century. Are you ready for the fourth turning? Strauss and Howe will change the way you see the world and your place in it. In the fourth turning, they apply their generational theories to the cycles of history and locate America in the middle of an unraveling period and on the brink of a crisis. How you prepare for this crisis, the fourth turning, is intimately connected to the mood and attitude of your particular generation. Are you one of the can-do GI generation? That would have been my father's generation. Who triumphed in the last crisis? Or do you belong to the meditating silent majority who enjoyed the 1950s high? Do you fall into the awakened boomer category of the 1970s and 80s? Or are you a Gen Xer struggling to adapt to our splintering world? Whatever your stage in life, the fourth turning offers bold predictions about how all of us can prepare individually and collectively for America's next rendezvous with destiny. This is not a quick read, and it's not an easy read. But essentially what these gentlemen do is take us through the history of the world since the Renaissance, but primarily of America since, 1776, since its inception, and shows how there are predictable cycles in the course of any society. The United States has gone through 3 cycles. We are at the very end of the third cycle. Each of those cycles was punctuated with a war. The War of Independence, the Civil War, and World War II. And the place that we are at now, there are four sub-cycles in any main cycle. And those 4 sub-cycles, like he said, it's the rebirth of a new idea, like what happened after FDR and the whole New Deal in the 50s and all that. That was a rebirth of the state of the United States from pre-war the U.S. to post-war U.S. After that, you have a rise or a growth in these new ideals. Then the new ideals start to fall apart, as they did in the starting in the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, and then you reach a crisis period, and that crisis is started by a catalytic event. Now, in this book, keep telling yourself this book was written 20 years ago. Okay. In this book, he foresaw many things that were going to happen today, and he wasn't being prophetic. He was simply using previous data that had happened in previous times comparable to our own, and suggesting these things may happen. One of the things he predicted was a 9/11-like scenario. He also predicted the complete reversal of political power, like is going on right now. And even though 9/11 happened back in 2001, he was sure back then that that wasn't the catalyst, that we weren't done yet. We weren't ready for the crisis to occur. Even though a lot of people who read his books were convinced that that was the crisis. What actually was the crisis was the financial crisis in 2007-8. That's what started us on the road that we're on now to a complete change in how we view our America. Our place in this change, how we turn on the airplane mode, I forgot. Anyway, so how we view this coming rebirth, essentially, because if you believe if you can get behind this guy, their theories, what you expect is that everything that we see around us is going to change in one way or another, to the good or perhaps to the bad. No one knows at this point. But how we view it, what we can bring to it, how we might harm it, it's all predicated on where each of us as an individual, are in our generational life. For example, we're either newly born young people, or we are young adults, old teenagers, young adults, or we are old adults going into middle life, or we are heading into our elderhood or in our elderhood. So one of those four places we belong. Based on our formative years, that will color how we see it. And that's where the whole idea of generation gaps come in, where generations often have a hard time understanding one another because their formative years were different than the formative years of another generation. Values were different. The way people solved problems was different. What these guys suggest is it's not a linear progression. Rather, it's a cyclic progression. And it's cyclic to the tune of about every 20 to 25 years, a new generation is born. There are only four main generations, the ones I told you: kids, young adults, middle age, and elderly. And each one of those generations follows a predictable path based on when they were born. And it happens over and over again, and it will continue to happen. That our progress, so to speak, is not linear, but rather it's cyclical. I've always felt that, from what I've read of history, I've just intuitively picked up on these cycles. Rome is a great example. England is another great example of societies that basically ruled the world and then didn't, for predictable reasons that this book will tell you about why Rome fell, why England fell, why America rose, and why America is going to fade, essentially. Although this turning might not be the fading. We may get through this third 100-year cycle and go into the next 100-year cycle intact. This guy suggests that we've never been in a more dangerous position in the history of tracking these cycles than we are now, because we actually could destroy ourselves if we wanted to. We weren't really able to do that before. We are now. Plus, we are in a environmental crisis, whether you believe it was brought on by humans or it's just simply what happens every so many millennia, or there was a combination thereof. No one can deny that we are in a global environmental / weather crisis. It's here. So that, combined with information technology and combined with military technology, could spell the end, basically, of humanity. And that's part of what this book examines, is how could that happen? Why have societies gone down so predictably over the course of history? And what might we expect? It also talks about how we can prepare ourselves. Now again, this was written 20 years ago, so the preparing ourselves period is kind of over. Either you were unconsciously or consciously preparing yourself, or you're SOL, essentially. And the preparations, just in broad strokes, the preparations that this man is suggesting will be needed in order for us to weather this storm are really interesting, because they harken back to 100 years ago. And essentially they cover things like a sense of community over self, a sense of self-reliance, an idea of denial, self-denial, and an acceptance that the flesh way that things have been in the post-war era, particularly the past 30 years, are almost necessarily going to go away. Things like Medicare, Medi-Cal, things like entitlement programs, all that sort of stuff. We are reaching a place where those things are not sustainable anymore. So, a drawing inward in terms of asking yourself about your own core values, and acting locally in your community, in your neighborhood, in your family, to be there to basically protect and serve one another is important. Sort of not conversely, but right along the lines of that, only from a more global standpoint, they're suggesting that that we keep ourselves informed, and that we stay involved in our greater communities, particularly from a position of being able to help one another. Mm-hmm. Now, that was interesting to me, because I've probably read this book 4 times cover to cover. That's how much information is in it. I'm a smart girl. I usually pick stuff up the first time. There is this is a mind bender, to the point that I've had to read it, digest it, go back and reread it. Oh, and I discovered this book about 5 or 6 years ago. So I've been I was sort of forewarned if I was to believe what was in here, and I've been watching this stuff happen. That's why I'm pulling it back out and talking to you guys about it, because I would love for as many of you to read this as see this video, and then get back to me with your opinions. Do you think it's bullshit? Do you see these things happening now, and so forth? I would love to know how you feel. So anyway, the interesting thing, I was going to leave you with this idea. All right, this past week, a lot of stuff has happened. A lot of emotions, behaviors, opinions have revealed themselves through the words and videos and behaviors of all of us, whether we've caught it on the news or seen something, we've been there in person, or we've talked to one another online. We're seeing this huge rending shift in how we are feeling. Each individual, are feeling. Everything from fear and horror to jubilance and joy, everything from smug excitement to terror. It's run the entire gamut. But there's one thing I've noticed that seems to be percolating up, at least from most of the people I know, that's you guys, and it is this idea of love. It's like we sort of intuitively get that in order to make our way through this thing that we are now facing, and this is worldwide. Watch the videos about what the Philippine president is saying, what Putin is saying, what all of the other world leaders are saying about what we are going through. This is a global situation. This idea of like helping where you can, being responsive to other people's needs, it seems to be upwelling primarily out of the middle. That's where I belong. I didn't vote for either candidate. I didn't feel like I could morally do that. I saw and see problems on both sides. also, having been kind of indoctrinated by this book, I'd already gotten past the idea that it was going to make a difference in either way. So I chose to abstain from voting for either one of those particular people. I'll put it to you that way. And I'm finding that this feeling of wanting to care for others seems to be coming out of the middle, and also the people who either voted for Trump but kind of almost against their will, and folks who voted for Hillary because they were afraid. You know, it seemed like a better solution than having Trump come into a leadership position of the presidency. So it seems to be that part of the spectrum that seem to be saying these words of just wanting to help now. So what happens over the next days, weeks, months, years, if we have that long, is going to be fascinating to watch, particularly as I turn back again and again and read this, and also use my own life experience and my own understanding of history and current affairs to kind of, walk my way through this minefield. I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you what's in this book. I would love to read passages of it to you, particularly the parts that talk about what to expect in the upcoming future, which they wrote 20 years ago, what to expect. And then the part about how to prepare, which they also wrote back then. And then the part about what to do once it happens, which they were projecting. I would really like to read some of that to you, but I'm not going to do that unless you want me to. I mean, if you want me to read some passages from this book to you to kind of, so it maybe can clarify a little bit more, I can take you through some of the main points. If no one's interested, or if you people are interested, I won't bore you with that on my videos, but I cannot tell you how strongly I urge you to read The Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe. If nothing else, it will poke your brain in places it probably has never been poked before. So, on that note, I'm going to say bye-bye, and I do love you, and I will talk to you later.